Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we are decoding one of the most massive and frankly deeply ironic historical shifts in all of human history. We're going to be tracking this dramatic pendulum swing, moving from a world where Roman emperors brutally persecuted and killed Christians to an empire completely ruled in the name of the Christian God. It's just an epic transformation, and we're going to use the historical sources directly to show you exactly how it all happened. Here is our roadmap for this 150-year journey. We'll start with rescuing the Roman Empire, then cover the Great Persecution, Constantine's conversion, a new official religion, defining Christian orthodoxy, and finally, the monastic escape. Let's jump right in. Section 1. Rescuing the Roman Empire. Now, to really understand this massive shift, we first have to meet the empire's unlikely savior, an uneducated military man from the rough region of Dalmatia in the Balkans. His name was Diocletian. Just look at this rapid timeline. Notice how incredibly fast this societal shift actually happened. I mean, in just a matter of decades, we go from Diocletian establishing absolute autocratic rule in 284 AD to the brutal Great Persecution of Christians in 303 AD. But then there's this massive pivot. Constantine wins a crucial battle in 312 AD and issues the Edict of Milan granting religious toleration just a single year later. So how did Diocletian actually pull the empire back from the brink of collapse? Well, he basically tossed out the old shared power facade of the Roman Republic. He set up what we call the dominate. Rulers were now called master, which is literally the exact same word that slaves used for their owners. Think about how shocking that must have been to traditional Roman values. Diocletian stopped wearing everyday clothes and went straight for jeweled robes and dazzling crowns. He even claimed descent from the chief Roman god, Jupiter, and demanded that anyone seeking a favor had to throw themselves at his feet and kiss the hem of his robe. But here's the thing about absolute power. It is absolutely not cheap. Diocletian expanded the Roman army by 25%, and this brings us to the real-world impact of autocracy. Paying for that massive military expansion required heavy new taxes, and that began a steady, mounting pressure that fundamentally eroded everyday Roman freedom. You can really see what he was going for when you look at this sculpture. Diocletian realized the empire was just way too large for one man to rule, so he split it up, creating a rule of four, known as the Tetrarchy. Notice how identical these four co-emperors look here. They're the exact same size, wearing the same style of clothing, gripping their swords while embracing each other. It's pure visual propaganda. It perfectly illustrates Diocletian's desperate attempt to rule a divided, massive empire through sheer unified autocracy. Now, to foot the bill for this massive state machine, Diocletian resorted to some extreme economic tactics. He actually tried fixing wages and prices in 301 AD, which, as you might guess, completely failed because people simply refused to cooperate. So the government pivoted. They started collecting taxes and actual physical goods and services. This heavy taxation steadily chipped away at individual freedom. Tenant farmers and their children were legally tied to their plots of land forever. Wealthy town leaders were suddenly forced to pay for any tax shortfalls out of their own pockets. It was so financially crushing that civic leaders were literally abandoning their homes and running away into the night just to escape the government burden. Section 2, the Great Persecution. You see, economic control just wasn't enough for Diocletian. He firmly believed the empire's troubles had a spiritual cause. The traditional Roman gods were angry, and he blamed this squarely on the rise of Christianity. So in 303 AD, Diocletian launched the Great Persecution, and the steps were completely systematic and brutal. First, the state seized Christian property. Then, Christians were expelled from all government administration. Churches were torn down, scriptures were burned. Finally, anyone who refused to participate in official traditional religious rituals was executed. But, ironically, these gruesome public executions actually created a wave of sympathy among some of their pagan neighbors, which ended up undermining the very peace Diocletian was trying so hard to restore. Section 3, Constantine's conversion. And this brings us right to the great pivot point of our pendulum swing. Constantine essentially co-opted the religion for the exact same reason Diocletian persecuted it: sheer political pragmatism to gain divine protection and military victory. According to his biographer, right in the middle of a civil war to become emperor, Constantine had a vision of Jesus' cross in the sky with the words, "With this sign you shall win the victory." When he actually triumphed at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 AD, he gave all the credit to the Christian God. For the very first time, a Roman ruler overtly allied himself with this new faith. Talk about walking a tightrope. Take a look at these two coins. On the left, you've got his traditional pagan Roman profile. He still holds the ancient title of highest pagan priest, by the way. But on the right, you see a coin featuring his battle standard carrying the Christogram. That's the combined Greek letters chi and rho, an early symbol for Christ. He was smart. He knew polytheists still vastly outnumbered Christians, so he pragmatically declared religious toleration, rather than just outlawing traditional Roman religion overnight. Section 4. A new official religion. Of course, that balancing act couldn't last forever. We now enter a massive cultural clash as Christianity transitions from this underground persecuted sect into a fully state-supported powerhouse. To understand why this transition was so tense, we really have to juxtapose these two completely incompatible worldviews. Traditional Romans found Christianity totally baffling. They worshipped many gods who they fully believed had bestowed a massive earthly empire upon them. Plus, traditional philosophies demanded pure adherence. Early Christianity, on the other hand, it worshipped a single savior who had failed to overthrow Roman rule and was executed as a common criminal. Even more confusing to traditional Romans, Christians actively sought out and openly embraced acknowledged sinners. To a Roman, that was just upside-down logic. Because of that deep cultural divide, emperors had to chip away at traditional religion slowly, using strategic decrees over decades. First step was the 313 AD Edict of Milan, granting basic toleration. Then, in 321 AD, Constantine made the Christian Lord's Day a holy day of rest, but he cleverly aligned it with Sunday, which allowed polytheists to think they were still honoring the sun god. Gradually, state funding was stripped from pagan temples, until finally, in 391 AD, Emperor Theodosius officially banned all traditional animal sacrifices. And just like that, Christianity was the official state religion. Now, this led to a complete and often tragic reversal of power dynamics. The once persecuted Christians were now holding the levers of power, and tensions routinely boiled over into violence. In 415 AD, Hypatia, a brilliant and famous pagan mathematician and philosopher, was brutally murdered by a Christian mob in a church in Alexandria. The outsiders had officially become the ultimate insiders. Section 5. Defining Christian orthodoxy. Now, you might be thinking that legalizing Christianity and making it the state religion brought peace to the empire, right? Well, actually, scratch that. It didn't. Instead, it launched these massive empire-wide arguments over what Christians should actually believe. And we're not just talking about debates among elites behind closed doors. This consumed the general public. Look at this amazing historical quote from Gregory of Nyssa describing the streets of Constantinople. Ordinary citizens were so fiercely debating complex theology, like whether Jesus was created out of nothing by God the Father, that you literally couldn't even ask a bath attendant if the water was warm without getting a heavy theological lecture in return. These fiery theological disputes were literally tearing families and communities apart. You had Arianism, which argued Jesus was created and not co-eternal with the Father. Nestorianism insisted Christ was two separate beings. Donatism, point blank, refused to forgive any Christian who had compromised with the Romans during the Great Persecution. And here's why this matters for the average citizen. The emperors themselves had to step in. They convened massive councils and effectively became the thought police of the ancient world just to define orthodoxy and outlaw these competing beliefs. Now, this strict, state-mandated moral order needed an intellectual framework, and it got one from the famous theologian Augustine. He argued that because humans suffered from original sin, we possessed an inborn moral corruption. Therefore, secular government wasn't just useful, it was strictly necessary to use coercion and force to suppress evil and compel religious unity. Augustine even taught that the only pure life was one of complete denial of bodily pleasure, viewing sex solely as a regrettable duty for procreation. Section 6. The monastic escape. So as the Christian church became incredibly wealthy, politically powerful, and strictly regulated, a brand new rebel movement was born in response. We see the rise of the ascetic heroes, the monks and nuns. To demonstrate their devotion, these individuals completely withdrew from the imperial system. They fled into the desert, renounced all wealth, sex, and comfort, and ate barely enough to survive. In a world where Christianity was now safe, extreme self-denial essentially replaced the old glory of martyrdom. But, practically speaking, they were also escaping those crushing imperial taxes and social restrictions we talked about earlier. Some of them achieved incredible feats of endurance. I mean, take Simeon, who famously lived on top of a tall pillar for 30 years. They literally became the new superheroes of the ancient world. And nothing illustrates this ultimate withdrawal quite like this. St. Catherine's Monastery on Mount Sinai. built in the 6th century. It looks like a literal fortress, and in many ways it was. It was a fortress of spiritual isolation. It's the physical manifestation of totally dropping out of the chaotic, politically charged, tax-heavy society that the Roman Empire had become. So think about the sheer irony of all this. By fleeing into the desert to completely escape the state's autocracy, the endless religious politics, and the crushing taxes, these ancient monks and nuns dedicated themselves to a life of quiet prayer and reading. Did these ultimate societal dropouts inadvertently build the very monastic institutions that preserved Western knowledge through the centuries to come? It is a fascinating question to chew on. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.